Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another exciting and informative video on our YouTube channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we want to thank you for watching. In this episode, I will be digging deep into what China wants in the continent of Africa. In this video as well, I will be looking at the economic fundamentals. I will dive into geopolitics and perspective, give you analytical information and contrasting information why China has made the continent of Africa a paramount imperative in its foreign policy in the continent of Africa. If you are new to this channel, I will encourage you to watch this video to the end because we have enough to cover. So without any much delay, let's just dive straight into it. Several countries in the continent of Africa struggle to climb the American policymakers' priority list, but it has no such problem with China. For 3 decades, the Chinese government has expended immense energy curtailing African countries. With only 2 exceptions over the last 30 years, the Chinese foreign ministers have also made Africa their first overseas destination every year. Other senior Chinese officials frequently call on their African counterparts. Visits reciprocated as well by an annual parade of senior Africans to Beijing. For example, former Namibian President Sam Nujoma visited China over 17 times. President Xi Jinping has also visited Africa 5 times throughout his tenure, including travel to South Africa in August for a state visit and also to attend the BRICS summit. Only the second overseas trip he has taken in 2023, excluding the one that most recently traveled to the United States to meet US President Joe Biden. The last visit by a United States President to an African country was then President Barack Obama's trip to Ethiopia in 2015. Contrast this with President Joe Biden's trip to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East just during the first year of his administration. The US President was recently in Egypt, no doubt, but that was as a result of the climate change conference.
China is the second largest economy in the world, a driver of global growth. So having a gathering like this with key business people, key policymakers and politicians at a time of heightened global tension, I think is a very good thing, because we can all listen to what China is trying to do. One, for its economy to recover and keep driving the global growth, keep contributing. 2, how is China feeling about these tensions and how can we cooperate better globally? Because we cannot solve the world's problems unless the 2 big economies, the 2 big powers get along.
Moving ahead, but now the Chinese government has drastically enlarged its footprint in Africa. Washington policymakers are paying attention. Trade between China and African countries reached a historic high of $254 billion as of 2021. In comparison, trade between the United States and African countries declined from a peak of $142 billion in 2008 to just over $64 billion in 2021, and it now accounts for a mere 1.1% of US global commerce. The Chinese government, moreover, has numerous energy, rails, and port projects across the continent.
The growing relationship with China is based as much on mutual respect as on mutual interests. That is evident, first of all, in your personal commitment to our continent, Mr. President. More generally, China relates to Africa as an equal. We see ourselves as a people on the road to prosperity. China's actions demonstrate that, President, you see us in the same way. This is a revolutionary posture in world affairs, and it is more precious than money.
If you look at the strategic option, China is now Africa's largest bilateral trade partner and creditor, and estimated over 10,000 Chinese companies operate on the continent of Africa, some of which dominate certain industry. Last year, for example, Chinese firms won nearly third of all African infrastructural contracts worth more than 50 million US dollars. At least 1 million Chinese expatriates lives in Africa, according to estimate, while tens of thousands of young Africans study in China on Chinese government scholarships every year. Beijing also deploys an array of other cultural, economic, and also increasingly military initiatives to charm the continent of Africa based on its strategy. To understand why the world's second largest economy, aspiring superpower, cuts Africa, it is necessary to understand the aim of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, which controls the Chinese government to return China to what it seems at its rightful place and an unchallengeable global power. This goal is embedded within Xi Jinping's dream of the rejuvenating of the Chinese nation, which he has slated for consummation in 2049.
China is probably one of the poster children for the success of the multilateral trading system. Since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, China has done phenomenally well. Its per capita income has increased over 12 times. It's now the largest exporter in the world. It's the second largest importer. So on all counts, China has done extremely well, and as everyone says, it's critical to the world economy. So what happens to China is of consequence not only to people in China, but to everyone around the world.
If you look at other aspects, the Chinese Communist Party believes that, furthermore, the current international system impairs national rejuvenations by privileging the West. As a result, it is creating institutions, for example, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as alternatives to the West-oriented institutions that have traditionally dominated the international system. If you look at other aspects, it is also prioritizing multilateral organizations, especially the United Nations, usually forums for reorienting the international system. For example, the CCP assiduously works to coup the UN Human Rights Council to subvert the international and traditional understanding of human rights that is unflattering to Beijing and to promote its own erased conception of rights. It is been succeeding in inserting specific Chinese phrases on the human rights into resolutions adopted by councils. If you look at strategic options with regards to China's interaction with the global community, specifically with the continent of Africa, Africa is key to those efforts because it is the largest voting bloc in the United Nations, and many of its countries are becoming more skeptical of Western-led international system. African governments increasingly voice their frustration that interest rate hikes in the United States of America makes servicing their own dollar denominations debt more expensive, as we've heard that from many African leaders, especially the president of Kenya, and that there is no permanent African members of the United Nations Security Council or that rating agencies unfairly downgrade their credit rating, further driving up borrowing costs.
Africa only now has a permanent seat on the G20, and that's through the AU. Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, is calling for a permanent seat for Africa at the UN Security Council. For far too long, frankly, Mr. President, Africa has not been included in influencing global decisions. Do you think that these two seats, these two changes, hopefully at the UN Security Council as well, but at the G20, is going to change that?
Well, those two seats are long overdue. One would ask, why did it not happen 10, 20 years ago, or even more? Why is it even being talked about now? And in reality, with the G20, it's beginning to happen. But here I want to say this. There are two problems. One is we, Africa itself, we need to organize, to be together, to have a voice, a strong voice, because there are many resources on our continent. Why don't we leverage that so that the rest of the world also is interested in working with us in a cooperative way, rather than just telling people to follow what they have decided. So that is one part. The other part is what I alluded to earlier, the power that is wielded by a number of countries in this world should also be used rationally and reasonably, and get to understand that Africa, for example, is as important as they are, so that, and they are not there to just be, Africa is not there to be influenced, or to take sides according to the lines they have decided or determined.
As coups have recently proliferated across West Africa, specifically the former French colonies, have responded with sanctions and also isolated measures. The number of governments that appreciate Beijing's very different approach is growing. However, African countries vote with Beijing in the United Nations at higher rates, including at some point most contentious issues like the 2019 cybercrime resolution. They also on average comprise between 40 and 50% of the signatories to the letters at the United Nations praising the Chinese government's policy in Xinjiang, Hong Kong and also Taiwan. Many also often support Chinese candidates for leadership positions at the United Nations, participating in China's Belt and Road Initiative, back Chinese position on Arkansas matters like the proper method for resolving maritime dispute in the South China Sea. If you look at strategic option here, as China continues to interact with the continent of Africa, this diplomatic support may well comprise the CCP's single greatest interest in Africa, but it has other important ones as well. Chief among them is the continent's great mineral wealth. Specifically, the minerals and also metals are the central to emerging high-tech industries that have the potential to secure a country's economic and political dominance. Africa once provided around a third of Chinese oil imports, but that figure has steadily slipped to around 10% today. China currently sources more oil from the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, and especially recently from Russia. Owing to Western sanctions, Russia sells oil to China, and a few other customers are cut rare prices. Unsurprisingly, Russia and Saudi Arabia are, respectively, the second and the third most important countries for Chinese energy engagement since 2013. If you look at the strategic option, why China is specifically focusing on the region and why Africa is also opening its doors for more opportunities with regards to Beijing's interaction. Beijing made in China 2025 strategic plan prioritizing developing a variety of high-tech sectors, and Chinese enterprise now dominates the production or refining of many of those necessary key minerals such as the cobalt, lithium, rare earth elements and also manganese. Chinese dominance is so comprehensive that it is the primary source for 7 out of the 13 minerals most critical to the United States of America, for which the United States of America is 95% or more important reliant. Chinese companies are preparing to continue and expanding their dominance in the sector. In the first half of 2023, Chinese investment in metals and mining stake grew by well over 100% year-on-year. Chinese activity in African mining sector reflects the broader trend. In 2000, there were only one operational mine, the Dakonge in South Africa's Limpopo province, under Chinese control in all of Africa. Today, Chinese firms control at the highest and they earn around 8% of the value of Africa's mining output. While that is significantly less than companies from traditional mining powerhouse like Canada and also Australia, it represents a surge in Chinese mining activity in Africa over the last 2 decades. Chinese mining activity in Africa is concentrated on certain key minerals and countries. Demonstrating the strategic nature of the investment, Chinese state-backed banks financing of mining operations also further the strategy. A conservative estimate is that 5 Chinese mining operations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo alone reaped not less than $120 billion in such financing. Chinese entities command about 25% of the Democratic Republic of the Congo minerals and metals production and have stake in 15 of the country's 19 cobalt production mines. They control about 12% of the value of Zambia's mining production, nearly 40% of Guinea's, and also about 25% of Gabon's management production, and the Republic of the Congo's sole industrial mine, as well as all 4 of Eritrea's. As we close down this episode, China is by a large margin the primary importer of African minerals, in 2020 buying 43% of sub-Saharan African mineral export. The Chinese Communist Party values Africa for many reasons, but the continent's diplomatic importance and mineral wealth help explain why it engaged the continent so intensely. This initially suggested that the party's preoccupation with Africa would persist as it continues its quest for national rejuvenation. If you look at Chinese interaction with the continent of Africa, several Chinese companies have also made Africa their main market, and how African countries have decided in the recent years to make their own decision. For those of you who feel the continent of Africa is not important and does not play any important role in the global community, you have to think again. The continent of Africa is poised to make strategic decisions in the next century. We want to thank you for watching. If you are new to our channel, we encourage you to subscribe, share our video, and we encourage you to watch other informative and educating content on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon on our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.